Hello everyone and welcome. This is a solution to our week 5 assignment and I want to begin by reading the project description. As a manager of a gift shop at the Metropolitan Zoo, you're responsible for managing the weekly payroll. Your assistant developed a partial worksheet, but you need to enter the formulas to calculate the regular pay, overtime pay, gross pay, taxable pay, withholding tax, FICA, and net pay. In addition, you want to include total pay columns and calculate some basic statistics. As you construct formulas, make sure you use absolute and relative cell references correctly in formulas. Alright, so now that we have our instruction sheet, before we begin with the steps, I quickly want to look at the Excel sheet and just kind of quickly go over it. So in this first column, we got the names of our employees at the gift shop. We have the number of dependents per each employee, the hourly wage they earn, and the number of hours they worked. The columns we will be populating are the regular pay, overtime pay, gross pay, taxable pay, federal withholding tax, FICA, and net pay. And just for those who are curious, the FICA is kind of the equivalent of the Canadian CPP. It's essentially another tax. Once you scroll down, we have an assumptions table here. So base work hours, that's 40. Overtime rate is 1.5. FICA rate is 7.65%. And the deductions per dependent is $50. Our tax rate table is over here. We have our taxable pay ranges and the equivalent tax rate. And finally, the summary statistics table is here. We will be populating the number of hours, gross pay, and net pay according to these to the average, highest, and lowest. And finally, some notes at the bottom here. If you have never dealt with payroll, that should clarify things, how certain values are calculated. So note number 1 says that the base work week is 40 hours. Regular pay is based on the hourly wage and the hours worked up to 40 hours. So either essentially 40 or less. Number 2 says overtime pay is based on overtime hours, the hourly wage, and the overtime rate. The gross pay is the total of the regular pay and the overtime pay, and the taxable pay is the difference between the gross pay and the product of the number of dependents and the deduction per dependent. Federal withholding tax is calculated on the taxable pay based on the tax table, which is up here. And then the FICA is calculated on the employee's gross pay. And finally, the net pay is based on the gross pay, federal withholding tax, and the FICA. Alright, so everything that we need to make these calculations are listed in our spreadsheet. So essentially everything that's in this table and everything that's in this table. Alright, so now that we are familiar with our spreadsheet, let's jump into the instructions. So step 1, we have done that, we have downloaded our stuff, and we'll begin with step 2. Step 2 says to use if functions to calculate the regular pay and overtime pay based on the regular 40-hour work week in cells E5 and F5. Pay overtime only for overtime hours. In cell G5, calculate the gross pay based on the regular and overtime pay. And then it kind of tells you what you should expect for the first employee. Alright, so there's a lot of stuff in here, so let's kind of break it down and maybe do it step by step. So maybe first let's look at regular pay, and regular pay is they want that in cell E5, and they want us to use that if function. So let's switch to our spreadsheet, regular pay, cell E5, and we're going to enter a function, and we want to use if function. I'm going to hit OK. So if you remember, the if function has the logical test, and then if the logical test is true, then we use this value from here. If that logical test is false, then we use the value from here. Alright, so for our logical test, we want to use, we want to take what's in D5, which is the hours worked. I'm going to put D5, and I want to take less than or equal to B21. So B21. So we're looking at cell D5, and our logical test has to be D5 less than or equal to B21. And if you remember, B21 is 40, which is the regular, the base work hours. Okay, so essentially anything 40 and under is regular pay, and anything above 40 is overtime pay. One thing to point out here with B21, you want to make that an absolute cell reference. So we're going to hit F4 on that, make sure that's an absolute cell reference. So if this logical test is true, you want to take what's in D5. Okay, you want to take what's in D5, which is hours worked, and you want to multiply that by C5, the hourly wage. So that's what we're going to do here. So D5 multiplied by C5. If this, however, is false, then you want to take a B21 and multiply that by C5. And again, B21 is equals 40, which is this cell right here. And you want to multiply that by C5, which is the hourly wage. And again, don't forget B21 has to be an absolute cell reference. Okay. Alright, so once we have that all in, I'm going to hit OK, and we should end up with 398. Let's go back to our instruction. So we got E5. Now we're going to focus on F5, which is the overtime pay. So again, for overtime pay, again, it's asking for an if function. So we will enter another if function. However, this time, for our logical test, we want to do a D5, and we want to make that to be greater than what's in B21. And again, B21, absolute cell reference. So we want to make sure that D5, whatever is in D5, has to be greater than what's in B21, which is 40 in this case. So it has to be more than 40. If this is true, if that ends up being more than 40, then we want to do D5 minus B21. I want to put that in brackets. And again, B21 should be absolute cell reference. And we want to multiply the result of that by C5 and by multiply that by B22. And I'm going to make that absolute as well. So we're going to take our D5, which is the hours worked. We're going to subtract the 40 from that. Once we get the answer, we're going to multiply that by our hourly wage. And then we're going to multiply that by B22, which is the overtime rate. Okay? If that logical test is true. However, if that logical test is false, all we simply want to enter is a 0. So if this number is 40 or less, then all we want for overtime pay is 0, because essentially there is no overtime pay. So once we have all this entered, we're going to hit OK, and we end up with 119 and 40 cents. Okay, go back to our instructions. Continuing on, in cell G5, calculate the gross pay based on the regular and overtime pay. All right, so let's switch back. G5, it's gross pay. It's simply our regular pay plus our overtime pay. I'm going to hit enter. $517.40. Okay, easy enough. That's step 2. I'm going to move on to step 3. Step 3 says create a formula in cell H5 to calculate the taxable pay. Multiply the number of dependents, which is column B, by the deduction per dependent, which is in B24, and subtract that from the gross pay. Okay, so we should end up with $417.40. So let's switch screens, go to H5. So again, we're going to select the G5, which is our gross pay. So G5, we're going to minus the number of dependents, which is B5 in this case. And then we want to multiply all that by what's in B24. But again, with B24, you want to make that absolute. So essentially what's going to happen is Excel will do a B5 times B24, and then whatever the result of that is, it will take whatever's in G5, which is your gross pay, and it will subtract the result of this, okay, because of the order of operations. As you know, multiplication comes first before subtraction. Okay, so once we have this in, we hit enter, we end up with $417.40. Go back to our instructions, and that's what we have in here, and ready to do step 4. For step 4 says use a VLOOKUP function in cell I5 to identify and calculate the federal withholding tax. Use the tax rates from the range D21 through B25. The VLOOKUP function returns the applicable tax rate, which you must then multiply by the taxable pay. Alright, so let's go back to I5. I5, this is a VLOOKUP, so we're going to insert a function here. We're going to select VLOOKUP, hit OK. And if you remember with VLOOKUP, there's 3 required arguments and 1 optional. So with the VLOOKUP value, we want to use H5, which is the taxable pay. So I'm going to put H5 in here. For the table array, I'm going to go to our taxable table right here, select that, which in the instructions said D21 to E24. Okay, so we got that in there. Expand this. For column index number, I want to select number 2. So we want to draw from this column. And for range lookup, which is optional, we're going to leave that blank, which means it's going to default to true. And that's what we want because these are ranges. These are not exact values. These are ranges. So we want range lookup as true. Okay, so once we have all this, we're going to hit OK. And as you can see, for the withholding tax, it returned 25%. But if we go back to our instruction here, it says that the lookup function returns the applicable tax rate, and that's what it did. That's 25%, which again it comes from here, 25%, which you must then multiply by the taxable pay. Okay, so I'm going to switch back here and go up here to our formula, and we have to multiply this by the taxable pay, which is H5. So we're going to put H5 in here. Okay, so that's going to Um, because the value that's returned here is the 25%, we have to multiply that by taxable pay in order to get that the actual tax value. So once you have that multiplied by H5, simply hit enter, and you should get $104.35. Gonna switch back to our instructions and look at step 5. Step 5, calculate the FICA in cell J5 based on the, gross pay and the FICA rate, which is in cell B23. And calculate the net pay in cell K5 and copy all the formulas all the way to row 16. Alright, so again, we're going to break this down a little bit. First, let's do J5, which is the FICA. Alright, so to calculate the FICA, we simply want to take what our gross pay, which is G5, and we want to multiply that by what's in B23, which is our FICA rate. Okay, so we want this. Oh, what happened here? So G5 multiply. Okay. G5 multiplied by B23. And again, you want to make that an absolute cell reference here. B23, that's the FICA rate. Want to make that an absolute cell reference. We want to hit OK on that. Alright, so that's that. That's J5. Next we want to calculate the net pay in K5. So this is K5. And net pay is, again, it's the gross pay, which is G5. And you want to minus your withholding tax, which is I5, and you want to minus your FICA tax, which is in J5. Oh, in J5. There we go. Enter, and that's that. Alright, and finally we want to copy all the formulas down to row 16. So we're going to select all the way from regular pay, I'm going to select it all the way to net pay, and pull all this down all the way to row 16. Alright, we have some problems here. What's going on here and here? We have all these NA. So let's back this up a little bit. And first let's start over here. So if we look at our formula, the array table right here, if you remember, the array table always has to be an absolute cell reference, and it's not in this case. So we're going to do that right now. F4 and F4. Alright, so now it is an absolute cell reference. So we're going to hit enter on that. That doesn't change, but again, if we try to copy all this down, because it wasn't absolute cell reference, well, what's going on here? The values were changing as we were copying them down. They were changing instead of staying put. So now when we copy them down, now there's no errors. Okay, so it's important to remember that when you do your VLOOKUP, it always, when you're putting your array table in, always absolute cell reference that. Alright, so we have all this copied. All copied. Let's go back here. Alright, so with the range E5 to K16 selected, use the quick analysis tool to calculate the total regular pay, overtime pay, gross pay, taxable pay, withholding tax, FICA, and net pay on row 17. Okay, so we'll switch back, and here's our tool. We want to select totals, and we want to select sum. Alright, that gives us the sum of all these columns here. There's a little note here from Mac users, so if you're a Mac user, follow this. And step 7, we want to, there's a lot of stuff in here, so we're going to do step by step. So apply accounting number format to the range C5 to C16. Alright, C5 to C16. I'm going to hit accounting format. Next, we want to apply the accounting number format to the first row of monetary data and the total row. Okay, so first row, we're going to do accounting format, and the total row, I'm going to do accounting format as well. So accounting format. All right, it's going to go back. I'm going to and then we're going to apply the comma style to the monetary values for the other employees. Okay, so everybody else except for the first employee, I'm going to select all that and then apply the comma style, which is here. Okay. Next, we want to underline the last employee's monetary values. Okay, so the last employee, all the monetary values, we want to underline that. So we select all this, and we're going to choose underline here. And then we want to use the format cell dialog box to apply top and double bottom border for the totals. Okay, so we're going to select the totals. We're going to go into our here, and we're going to select the top and double bottom borders. Alright, so it should look somewhat like that. Alright, so that's step 7. Step 8, insert appropriate functions to calculate the average, highest, and lowest values in the summary statistics area. So the range of from I-21 to K-23 of the worksheet. Okay, so let's go over there. So I-21, so this area here. All right, so for average, so let's see, our we want to average out the number of hours. So number of hours, or the hours worked, is in cell, or in the column rather, D. So here with the average, we want to insert our function here, and we want to select average, and I hit OK. And it's going to ask for a range. So you want to have everything, let's see here, from D5 all the way to D16 for this one. So it's this column right here. I'm going to hit OK. So we're averaging the hours worked. Okay. Now for the highest, again, we want to insert a function. We want to use our maximum function, and again, you want the same range of cells, so D5 through D16. Hit OK. And same thing for the lowest. I'm going to insert this time a min function, and again the same range of cells, so D5 through D16. Okay. Next is gross pay, and gross pay is column G. Okay, so for average, again, we're going to insert a function. We're going to average here, but this time we want G5 through G16. And same thing for this time, we're going to do minimum, or sorry, we're going to do maximum. And again, in G5, G16, enter. And here we're going to do minimum. So minimum, again, same range, G5, G16. All right, and finally net pay. Net pay is in column K. So for average, again, we're going to select our average function. And this time for range, we're going to go with K5 through K16. And for the highest, we're going to select a maximum function. Again, K5, K16. And finally, our minimum function. So K5, K16. All right, so that's that. Next, we want to format the number of hours calculations as general number format with 1 decimal. Okay, so let's go back here, number of hours. We're going to select all this. We're going to select general, and we want only 1 decimal. Okay, so that's 1 decimal. And the remaining calculations with the accounting number format. Okay, so the remaining, the gross pay and the net pay, we're going to simply select accounting there. Okay, so that concludes step 8. Step 9, insert a footer with your name on the left side. So go back under page layout tab. This is chapter 1 stuff, so we should be very familiar with that. Header and footer, just to make sure what instructions are to insert a footer. So we want a footer, left section, your name, the sheet name code in the center, and the file name on the right side of the worksheet. So center, we're going to insert our sheet name, and then finally in the right section we're going to enter the file name. I'm going to hit OK on this. OK. All right, and step 10, save and close your workbook. Okay, so that concludes our concludes this exercise. These are the values you should have. I'm going to post this video under on DC Connect. I also have the PDF solution there if you want to kind of try it on your own first, but you want to make sure that you have the right values. Okay. All right. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in class.